David Johnson never thought he'd be sitting in a fancy television studio in New York City. Just 5 years ago, he was working double shifts at a warehouse in Cleveland, trying to pay for his computer science classes at night. Now, at 34, he owned a company worth $50 million. The journey hadn't been easy. David grew up in a neighborhood where most kids didn't even finish high school, let alone dream of starting their own business. His mother worked 3 jobs to keep their small apartment, and his father had left when David was just 8 years old. But David had something that kept him going. He loved solving problems, especially with computers. In high school, David spent every free moment in the computer lab. While other kids were hanging out after school, he was teaching himself how to code. His teachers noticed his talent and helped him apply for scholarships. That's how he managed to get into college, though he still had to work full-time to survive. The idea for his company came to him during one of those late-night warehouse shifts. David was thinking about his younger sister who was struggling in school. The teachers at her school meant well, but they had too many students and not enough time. David wondered if there was a way technology could help kids learn better, especially kids like his sister who needed extra support. He started working on the idea in his tiny apartment. Every night after his warehouse shift, David would sit at his old laptop and write code. He was building educational software that could adapt to each student's learning style. The program would notice if a kid was having trouble with math and would automatically provide extra practice problems. If a student was good at reading, it would give them more challenging books. David tested his early versions with kids in his neighborhood. He'd bring his laptop to the community center and watch how children interacted with his software. Their excitement when they finally understood a difficult concept drove him to keep improving the program. After 2 years of working nights and weekends, David had something special. His software was helping kids learn faster than traditional methods. Word spread quickly through local schools. Teachers started calling him, asking if they could use his program in their classrooms. That's when David made the biggest decision of his life. He quit his warehouse job and used his savings to start his company. The first year was terrifying. There were months when he barely had enough money for rent, living on instant noodles and hoping the next school district would sign up for his software. But slowly, things started to change. Schools began reporting amazing results. Kids who had been failing were suddenly improving their grades. Teachers who had been struggling to reach certain students found that David's software was making their jobs easier and more effective. Takir. Breakthrough came when the Chicago School District decided to test David's software in 50 schools. The results were incredible. Reading scores went up by an average of 25% in just one semester. Math scores improved even more. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon David was getting calls from school districts across the country. Within 3 years, over 200,000 students were using David's educational software every day. His company grew from just him working in his apartment to over 100 employees in a real office building. But David never forgot where he came from. He made sure his software was always affordable for schools that served low-income communities. Despite his success, David rarely did interviews or appeared on television. He was more comfortable in his office working with his team to improve the software than he was in front of cameras. He believed his work should speak for itself. When reporters called, he usually politely declined and suggested they talk to the teachers and students who were actually using his programs. That's why everyone was surprised when David agreed to appear on Morning America Today, one of the most popular daytime television shows in the country. The show's host, Patricia Wells, had been trying to book David for months. Her producers told him it would be a great opportunity to share his story and help more people learn about his educational software. David's team was excited about the appearance. His marketing director, Kelly, thought it could help them reach even more schools. His business partner, Robert, believed it might attract investors who could help them expand internationally. David himself was hesitant, but he finally agreed. When Patricia's producers promised the interview would focus on education and helping children learn. The night before the interview, David couldn't sleep. He walked around his apartment, practicing answers to questions he thought Patricia might ask. He prepared statistics about his company's impact, gathered testimonials from teachers, and even put together a short video showing students using his software. David's mother called him that evening. She was proud, but worried. "Just be yourself, honey," she told him. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong there. You've earned this." His sister called too. She was now in college, studying to become a teacher herself. "I'm going to record the show and watch it with all my friends," she said. "We're so proud of you, David." David spent the early morning hours reviewing his company's latest data. Over 400,000 students were now using his software daily. His programs were active in schools across 42 states. Teachers regularly sent him messages about students who had transformed their academic performance using his tools. As he got dressed for the interview, David thought about why he had really agreed to appear on the show. It wasn't about publicity or recognition. He wanted more kids to have access to better education. He wanted teachers to know there were tools available to help them reach every student. If appearing on television could help even one more child succeed in school, it would be worth stepping out of his comfort zone. David arrived at the television studio early that morning, carrying a folder full of success stories and a tablet loaded with real-time data from his educational platform. He had no idea that in just a few hours his life would change completely. He didn't know that Patricia Wells had a reputation for controversial interviews designed to create viral moments, rather than meaningful conversations about education. As David sat in the green room, reviewing his notes one last time, he felt confident and prepared. He was ready to talk about the power of technology to transform education. He was ready to share the stories of students whose lives had been changed by having access to personalized learning tools. What he wasn't ready for was what Patricia Wells had actually planned for their interview. The bright studio lights were almost blinding as David walked onto the set of Morning America Today. The audience applauded politely as he shook hands with Patricia Wells, the show's longtime host. Patricia was known for her sharp questions and quick wit, but she had built her reputation on being tough but fair with her guests. David settled into the comfortable guest chair, adjusting his tie, nervously. This was his first major television appearance, and he could feel his heart beating faster than usual. The studio audience was larger than he had expected, with about 200 people filling the seats. Camera operators moved around quietly, getting their angles ready for the live broadcast. "Welcome back to Morning America Today," Patricia said, flashing her famous smile at the camera. "I'm here with David Johnson, the founder and CEO of EduTech Solutions, a company that's been making waves in the education world. David, thank you for joining us this morning." "Thank you for having me, Patricia," David replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm excited to talk about how technology can help students succeed." The first few minutes went exactly as David had hoped. Patricia asked about his background and how he had started his company. David talked about growing up in Cleveland, working at the warehouse, and developing his first educational software in his small apartment. The audience seemed engaged, and Patricia nodded along with his story. "Your software is now being used by hundreds of thousands of students," Patricia said. "That's quite an achievement for someone who started with nothing. Tell us about the impact you're seeing in schools." David's eyes lit up as he began sharing success stories. He talked about students in Detroit who had improved their reading levels by 3 grades in 1 year. He mentioned teachers in rural schools who were finally able to give personalized attention to each student using his adaptive learning technology. "We have kids who used to hate math actually getting excited about solving problems," David explained. "The software adjusts to each student's pace and learning style. A child who learns visually gets more diagrams and pictures. A student who learns better by hearing things gets more audio explanations." But then something shifted in Patricia's tone. David noticed it first in her eyes, which seemed to narrow slightly. Her smile became more rigid, less genuine. "Now, David, I have to ask," Patricia said, leaning forward in her chair. "There's been a lot of discussion lately about opportunities in the tech industry. Some people might wonder whether your success is entirely due to your own merit, or if, perhaps, certain initiatives might have played a role." David blinked, not immediately understanding what she was suggesting. "I'm sorry. Could you clarify what you mean by initiatives?" Patricia's smile grew wider but not warmer. Well, we all know there are programs designed to help certain groups get ahead in business. Diversity quotas, special funding opportunities, that sort of thing. I'm just wondering if that might have given you advantages that other entrepreneurs don't have. The studio audience began to murmur uncomfortably. David felt his stomach drop as he realized what was happening. This wasn't going to be a conversation about education after all. Patricia, I can assure you that my company has succeeded based on the quality of our product and the results we deliver. For students, David said carefully, we've been profitable for 3 consecutive years without any special funding or subsidies. But Patricia wasn't finished. Of course, I'm not questioning the success of your company. I'm just curious about how you got started. After all, most tech entrepreneurs come from backgrounds with significant resources and connections. You mentioned working in a warehouse. How does someone go from that to running a $50 million company? David could feel the cameras focused on his face. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay professional. Education and hard work, Patricia. I spent years teaching myself programming, earned my degree while working full-time, and built my first software prototype in my spare time. But surely you had help along the way, Patricia pressed. Mentors, perhaps, special programs designed to fast-track promising candidates from your community. The implication was becoming clearer with each question. David realized that Patricia wasn't interested in his educational software or its impact on students. She was trying to suggest that his success wasn't legitimate, that he had somehow received unfair advantages because of his race. The only help I had was from teachers who believed in me and encouraged me to pursue computer science, David replied, his voice remaining steady despite his growing frustration. Everything else came from studying, working, and refusing to give up on my goals. Patricia continued her line of questioning, each query more pointed than the last. She asked about his educational background, seemingly surprised that he had attended a reputable university. She questioned whether his software was truly innovative or just a repackaging of existing educational tools. Some critics have suggested that companies like yours are simply taking advantage of schools' desire to appear progressive, Patricia said. How do you respond to the idea that districts might be choosing your software for reasons beyond its educational merit? David felt his jaw tighten. The audience was visibly uncomfortable now, with some people shifting in their seats and whispering to each other. He could see the camera operators exchanging glances, clearly aware that this interview had taken an unexpected turn. Patricia, I think you should look at the data, David said, his voice becoming firmer. Our software has been independently tested by education researchers. Students using our programs show measurable improvements in test scores, engagement, and long-term retention of material. But Patricia seemed determined to continue down this path. Of course, test scores are important, but there are many qualified entrepreneurs out there who might not have had the same opportunities you've received. Don't you think it's worth considering whether resources might be better allocated to companies with different backgrounds? David paused, staring at Patricia with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. The studio had become very quiet, with even the crew members looking uncomfortable with the direction of the interview. Patricia, David said slowly, are you seriously suggesting that my company's success is somehow taking opportunities away from more deserving entrepreneurs? I'm simply asking questions that many of our viewers might be thinking, Patricia replied, maintaining her artificial smile. In an era where everyone is talking about fairness and equality, isn't it important to examine all aspects of success? David looked out at the audience and could see the mix of emotions on their faces. Some people looked angry on his behalf. Others seemed embarrassed by what they were witnessing. A few appeared to be nodding along with Patricia's questions. He glanced at the cameras and realized that millions of people were watching this conversation live. Students who used his software might be seeing their role model being questioned and diminished on national television. Teachers who had advocated for his programs might be wondering if they had made the right choice. David thought about his mother, who was probably watching from her apartment in Cleveland. He thought about his sister, who had texted him that morning to say how proud she was. He thought about the hundreds of thousands of students who were using his software at that very moment, working hard to improve their futures. That's when David made a decision that would change everything. Instead of getting defensive or angry, he was going to respond with facts, dignity, and the truth about what really mattered in education. David took a deep breath and reached for his tablet, which he had placed on the small table next to his chair. The studio fell completely silent as everyone waited to see how he would respond to Patricia's increasingly hostile questions. Even the camera operators stopped moving, sensing that something important was about to happen. "Patricia," David said, calmly, powering on his tablet. "I think you're asking the wrong questions. While we've been sitting here discussing my worthiness, there are children across America who are proving theirs every single day." He swiped across the screen and turned the tablet toward the camera. "Right now, at this very moment, there are 412,000 students logged into our educational platform. These are real children in real classrooms working on real problems." The camera zoomed in on David's tablet screen, showing a live dashboard with numbers that were constantly changing. Students were logging in and out, completing lessons, asking for help, and celebrating their achievements in real time. "This is little Jessica in Birmingham, Alabama," David said, pointing to one section of the screen. "She's 8 years old and she's working on multiplication tables. 3 months ago she was struggling with basic addition. Today she's solving problems that most kids don't tackle until 4th grade. Patricia tried to interrupt, but David held up his hand gently. "Please, let me finish answering your question about whether my company deserves its success." He swiped to another screen showing a map of the United States with thousands of small dots representing active users. "These dots represent schools that chose our software not because of any diversity initiative, but because it works. Look at these test score improvements." The data was overwhelming. School districts across the country had reported average reading improvements of 23%. Math scores had increased by an even larger margin. Student engagement was up, and teacher satisfaction had improved significantly in schools using David's software. "Here's what really matters," David continued, his voice growing stronger and more confident. "This is a school in rural Montana, where the nearest library is 40 miles away. These kids now have access to thousands of books and learning materials through our platform. This is a school in inner-city Detroit, where class sizes are often over 30 students per teacher. Our software helps each child get personalized attention." The studio audience was completely captivated now. Even Patricia seemed momentarily speechless as David methodically dismantled her attempts to diminish his achievements. David switched to a video screen on his tablet. "I want you to meet someone, Patricia. This is Mrs. Rodriguez, a 3rd-grade teacher in Phoenix." The video showed a warm, middle-aged woman standing in front of a classroom full of engaged students. "When we first started using David's software," she said in the video, "I honestly didn't expect much. We'd tried other computer programs before with limited success, but within the first month I could see the difference. My students were excited about learning again." The video continued with Mrs. Rodriguez explaining how the adaptive technology had helped her reach students who had been falling behind. She showed examples of children who had made remarkable progress, their confidence growing along with their skills. "But here's the most important part," David said, pausing the video and looking directly at Patricia. "Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't care what color I am. She doesn't care where I went to school or how I started my company. She cares that her students are learning. She cares that children who used to struggle are now succeeding." David's voice remained calm, but there was an underlying strength that commanded attention. "You asked whether more deserving entrepreneurs should have received the opportunities I've been given. Let me tell you about the opportunities I've created." He pulled up another screen showing employment data. "My company now employs 137 people. These are programmers, designers, educators, customer service representatives, and sales staff. Many of them are people who, like me, didn't have traditional connections in the tech industry." The numbers were impressive. David's company had created high-paying jobs in multiple states. Many of his employees had been hired straight out of college or had transitioned from other industries. The company's commitment to hiring based on merit and potential rather than connections had created opportunities for people who might not have otherwise broken into the tech world. "But employment is just the beginning," David continued. "We've partnered with universities to provide scholarships for students from underserved communities who want to study comp. computer science or education. We've donated our software to schools that couldn't otherwise afford it. We've trained thousands of teachers on how to use technology effectively in their classrooms. Patricia finally found her voice again. That's all very admirable, David, but I think our viewers would still like to know. What they'd like to know, David interrupted gently but firmly, is whether what we're doing is working. And the answer is yes, it's working better than anyone expected. He showed Patricia and the camera another screen displaying long-term outcome data. Students who had used his software for more than 2 years were performing significantly better on standardized tests. They were more likely to stay in school, more likely to pursue advanced courses, and more likely to express interest in continuing their education after graduation. These results aren't because of any special program or initiative, David explained. They're because we built something that actually helps children learn. We studied how kids absorb information, we tested our theories in real classrooms, and we improved our software based on what teachers and students told us they needed. The studio audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. People were standing up, clearly moved by what they were hearing. The camera panned across faces that showed admiration, respect, and inspiration. David looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the millions of viewers watching at home. Patricia asked whether I deserved the opportunities I've received. But I think the better question is this: do these children deserve the opportunity to reach their full potential? Because that's what this is really about. He held up his tablet one more time, showing the live dashboard where the number of active students had grown to over 415,000 during their conversation. While we've been talking, these kids have been learning. They've been solving problems, reading stories, exploring new ideas, and building confidence in their abilities. That's what success looks like, David said, his voice filled with quiet passion. Not the size of my company or the amount of money we've made, but the number of children who are discovering that they're capable of more than they ever imagined. Patricia sat in stunned silence, clearly unprepared for David's measured but devastating response. The audience continued to applaud, and even some of the camera crew were nodding in appreciation. David had done something remarkable. Instead of getting angry or defensive, he had redirected the entire conversation away from divisive questions about race and privilege and focused it on what really mattered: helping children succeed. He had used facts, data, and real stories to show that his company's value wasn't debatable. It was measurable in the lives it had changed. The interview wasn't over yet, but everyone in the studio knew that something significant had just happened. David had not only defended himself with dignity and grace, but he had also reminded everyone watching what success should really look like in America. David wasn't finished. The applause from the studio audience gradually quieted as he prepared to address each of Patricia's insinuations with surgical precision. He had remained calm during her attack, but now it was time to set the record straight completely. Patricia, since you've raised questions about my qualifications and background, let me give you and your viewers the complete picture, David said, his voice steady and confident. You seemed surprised earlier when I mentioned my education. I have 2 engineering degrees from MIT, one in computer science and another in cognitive science. I graduated summa cum laude from both programs. He paused to let that sink in. The camera captured Patricia's face as she realized her assumptions had been completely wrong. David continued methodically. You also questioned whether my company has succeeded based on merit. Let me share some facts that might interest you. Our educational software has been independently tested by researchers at Stanford University, the University of Michigan, and Johns Hopkins. All 3 studies concluded that students using our platform show significantly greater learning gains than those using traditional methods or competing software. David pulled up another screen on his tablet. The Department of Education has endorsed our software through 3 different presidential administrations. Both Republican and Democratic education officials have praised our results. This isn't political, it's educational science. The studio audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the production crew had stopped what they were doing to listen. You asked about special funding and advantages, David continued. Here's the truth. My company has never received government subsidies, diversity grants, or special loans. We were funded initially by my own savings from working at that warehouse, then by early customers who paid for our software because it helped their students. Later, we received investment from venture capital firms who were interested in our profit margins and growth potential. David looked directly at Patricia, who was shifting uncomfortably in her chair. Our investors include some of the most successful business minds in America. They didn't invest in my company to meet diversity requirements. They invested because we were generating better returns than most tech startups and solving a real problem in education. He switched to a financial screen on his tablet. Since you brought up the question of whether other entrepreneurs might be more deserving, let me show you what we've accomplished. Our company has been profitable for 3 consecutive years. We've grown our revenue by an average of 47% annually. We've captured 18% of the adaptive learning software market, competing successfully against companies with much larger budgets and more established brands. The numbers were impressive, but David had an even more powerful point to make. But you know what I'm most proud of? We've done all of this while keeping our software affordable for schools that serve low-income students. Many of our competitors charge schools twice what we do for inferior products. David's voice grew more passionate as he continued. You see, Patricia, this isn't just about business for me. It's personal. I grew up in schools that didn't have enough textbooks, let alone computers. I watched talented kids give up on education because they didn't get the support they needed. I started this company to make sure other children wouldn't have to experience what I did. He showed the audience another video on his tablet. This one featured a teenage student named Carlos from Los Angeles. I used to hate reading, Carlos said in the video. The books at school were boring and too hard for me. But David's program found books that I actually wanted to read, and it helped me understand the difficult words. Now I'm reading at a college level, and I want to become a teacher myself. That's Carlos Rivera, David explained. 2 years ago, he was reading at a 6th grade level as a high school sophomore. He was about to drop out of school. Today, he's been accepted to UCLA with a full scholarship to study education. Carlos doesn't care about diversity initiatives or corporate politics. He cares that someone created a tool that helped him discover his own potential. Patricia tried once again to interrupt, but David gently continued. You mentioned that resources might be better allocated to companies with different backgrounds. Let me tell you about the allocation of resources in education. David's tablet now showed a map highlighting educational funding disparities across the United States. Schools in wealthy districts spend an average of $15,000 per student per year. Schools in poor districts spend less than $8,000. Our software helps level that playing field by giving all students access to personalized learning tools, regardless of their zip code. The data was striking. Schools using David's software were showing improved outcomes, even in districts with limited funding. The technology was helping to close achievement gaps that had persisted for decades. Here's another allocation of resources that might interest you, David said, bringing up employment statistics. The tech industry has long been criticized for lacking diversity. When I started my company, I made a commitment to hire the best people, period. That means looking beyond traditional recruiting networks and giving opportunities to talented individuals who might be overlooked by other companies. He showed photos of his diverse team of employees. 60% of our programmers are women. 40% of our leadership team are people of color. 70% of our employees are first-generation college graduates. We didn't achieve this through quotas or lowered standards. We achieved it by focusing on talent and potential, rather than connections and pedigree. David looked back at Patricia, who had been unusually quiet during his detailed response. You asked if I think other entrepreneurs might be more deserving. Here's what I think. America is full of talented people who deserve opportunities. My success doesn't take anything away from them. In fact, it proves that when people are given a chance to succeed based on their merit and hard work, amazing things can happen. The studio audience erupted in applause again, this time even louder and longer than before. People were standing and cheering, clearly moved by David's comprehensive and dignified response. But David had one more point to make. He waited for the applause to die down, and then spoke directly to the camera. Patricia, while you've been questioning whether I deserve my suka, yes, I've been thinking about who really deserves recognition here. The teachers who work with limited resources to help every child succeed deserve recognition. The students who overcome challenges and refuse to give up on their dreams deserve recognition. The parents who sacrifice to give their children better opportunities deserve recognition. He paused, looking around the studio at the faces that were now filled with respect and admiration. And frankly, the entrepreneurs who are solving real problems and creating real value deserve to be judged by their results, not by assumptions about how they achieved those results. David set down his tablet and looked directly at Patricia one final time. I came here today to talk about education and how technology can help children learn. I hope that's what your viewers will remember from this conversation. Not the questions about my worthiness, but the evidence of what's possible when we focus on helping every child reach their potential. The studio fell silent except for scattered applause that gradually grew into a sustained ovation. Patricia sat speechless, clearly unprepared for the thorough and devastating response she had just witnessed. David had not only defended himself, but had also elevated the entire conversation, turning what could have been a bitter argument into a powerful demonstration of grace under pressure and commitment to something greater than himself. The interview ended with David shaking Patricia's hand professionally, despite everything that had happened. As he walked off the set, the studio audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. But David had no idea that the real response was just beginning to unfold across America. Within 30 minutes of the show ending, clips from the interview were already appearing on social media. Someone in the studio audience had recorded David's response on their phone and posted it to Twitter with the caption, "This man just delivered the most powerful response I've ever seen on live television." The video spread like wildfire. On Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, people were sharing clips of David calmly presenting his data and telling the stories of students who had been helped by his software. The hashtag #LetHimSpeak became the top trending topic in the United States within 2 hours. But it wasn't just the speed of the response that was remarkable. It was the diversity of people who were supporting David. Teachers from across the country began sharing their own stories about how his software had transformed their classrooms. Parents posted videos of their children using the educational platform and achieving academic milestones they never thought possible. Celebrity endorsements started pouring in. Famous actors, musicians, and athletes shared the interview clips with messages of support. "This is what real success looks like," wrote one popular singer. "David Johnson is proof that when you focus on helping others, you create something truly valuable." Professional athletes shared their own stories of overcoming adversity and achieving success through hard work and determination. Several posted side-by-side photos of themselves as children in challenging circumstances next to images of their current success, with captions like, "David's story is America's story." Politicians from both parties praised David's response, though for different reasons. Conservative leaders highlighted his emphasis on personal responsibility and business success. Progressive politicians focused on his commitment to educational equity and helping underserved communities. For once, both sides of the political divide seemed to agree on something. But the most powerful responses came from ordinary Americans who saw themselves in David's story. A factory worker in Ohio posted a video explaining how he was taking night classes to learn computer programming, inspired by David's example. A single mother in Texas shared how David's educational software had helped her daughter overcome learning difficulties. Teachers were particularly vocal in their support. The National Education Association issued a statement praising David's work and condemning the treatment he had received on the show. Individual educators shared stories about the challenges they faced in underfunded schools and how technology like David's was making a real difference for their students. Meanwhile, Patricia Wells was facing a very different kind of response. Her social media accounts were flooded with criticism from viewers who felt she had been unfair and disrespectful. People were posting side-by-side comparisons of her questions with David's facts, highlighting how thoroughly her assumptions had been proven wrong. Major advertisers began pulling their commercials from Patricia's show. A car company was the first to announce they would no longer sponsor Morning America Today, followed by a major food brand and several retail chains. In their statements, these companies emphasized their commitment to supporting positive conversations about education and opportunity. The network that aired Patricia's show received thousands of complaints from viewers. Many people called to express their disappointment with the interview and to praise David's handling of the situation. The network's phone lines were so overwhelmed that they had to set up additional customer service staff to handle the volume. 3. Days after the interview, Patricia issued a public apology. In a prepared statement, she said she regretted the tone of her questions and acknowledged that David had demonstrated remarkable grace and professionalism during their conversation. But for many viewers, the apology felt too little, too late. The controversy ultimately cost Patricia her job. 2 weeks after the interview, the network announced that Morning America Today would be ending its run after 15 years. Patricia's contract was not renewed, and she quietly left television to pursue other opportunities. For David, however, the response opened doors he had never expected. Within a week of the interview, his company received over 50,000 new inquiries from school districts interested in his educational software. The waiting list for his platform grew to nearly 2 million students as schools across the country requested access. Major technology companies reached out to discuss partnerships. Google wanted to integrate David's adaptive learning algorithms into their educational tools. Microsoft offered to help him expand internationally. Apple proposed featuring his software in their education initiatives. But David was most excited about the influx of young people who reached out to him directly. Hundreds of students sent emails and messages describing their own academic challenges and asking for advice. High school students interested in computer science requested mentorship. College graduates wanted to know about job opportunities at his company. David used his newfound platform to establish the Future Leaders Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship for students from underserved communities who wanted to pursue careers in technology or education. The foundation's initial funding came from David's personal wealth, but donations from supporters across the country quickly multiplied the available resources. The foundation's first initiative was to provide free laptops and internet access to students who needed them to participate in online learning. The second was a coding boot camp for young adults who wanted to transition into tech careers but couldn't afford traditional computer science programs. David also began speaking at schools and conferences across the country, sharing his story and encouraging young people to pursue their dreams regardless of their circumstances. His message was simple but powerful. Focus on solving problems that matter, work harder than everyone expects, and never let other people's doubts become your own limitations. 6 months after the interview, David received an invitation that surprised even him. The President of the United States asked him to join a national task force on educational technology. The bipartisan group was charged with developing strategies to improve learning outcomes in American schools, particularly in underserved communities. At the task force's first meeting, David found himself sitting at a table with education secretaries, university presidents, and technology leaders from around the world. As he looked around the room, he thought about how far he had traveled from that warehouse in Cleveland where he used to work double shifts. But David's greatest satisfaction came from the daily reports he received about students using his software. Every morning, he would review the data showing how many children had logged in, what they had learned, and how they were progressing. The numbers had grown far beyond what he had ever imagined possible. Teachers continued to send him updates about individual students who had been transformed by access to personalized learning. Parents shared photos of their children excitedly working through lessons on tablets and computers. School principals reported improved test scores and increased student engagement. 1 year after the interview, David received a handwritten letter that moved him to tears. It was from Carlos, the student from Los Angeles who had been featured in one of his videos during the television appearance. Carlos was now thriving in his first year at UCLA and had been selected to participate in a summer research program studying educational technology. Mr. Johnson, the letter read, I don't know if you remember me, but your software changed my life. More than that, watching how you handled yourself on that TV show taught me something important about dignity and perseverance. Thank you for believing that kids like me deserve a chance to succeed. David framed that letter and hung it on the wall behind his desk, where he could see it every day. It reminded him that success wasn't about winning arguments on television or building profitable companies. Success was about creating opportunities for others to discover their own potential and then watching them soar.